Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Deal. Lane Kiffin, the Ole Miss Rebels. I don't think people realize how dangerous this program can be in the rest of 2024. And I get it like that. Well, I think a lot of the national media, a lot of college football fans across the country kind of just wrote this Ole Miss football program off after that loss at home against Kentucky. And Dill, you more than me kind of came away from that football game and said, yeah, it was sloppy and inexcusable performance by Ole Miss, arguably the worst performance we've seen under the Lane Kiffin era. You came out of that football game and said, this Ole Miss team, like, I'm still kind of buying stock in what they're about. I think it most notably starts with this Ole Miss defense. And I'll just start this episode with a hot take, and I've been kind of mulling it over in my head over the last couple of days. Are we looking at the best defensive line that we see in the SEC? And yeah, a little bit hot, right? Texas A&M, Tennessee. I look at this Ole Miss team. We're going to go over some of the numbers that we've seen and say, I think I might take this unit over any unit in the SEC. And you look at this Ole Miss defense and say it legitimately looks like a top end defense in the SEC. And what I think would excite a lot of Ole Miss fans is what happens when this Ole Miss offense starts to click. Like, I don't even think we saw this Ole Miss offense click against South Carolina. Certainly weren't clicking against Kentucky, but we all know Lane Kiffin, Jackson Dart, all the weapons that they have on this Ole Miss offense. At some point, I feel like it's going to get clicking. And I think this suddenly becomes one of the most dangerous teams, not only in the SEC, but in the country. Dill, let's get into, I guess what you would say is kind of like a midweek check-in or mid-season check-in with this Ole Miss program. Talk about what we've seen from this team up until this point. Fired up to get into it now. Before we do, and as always, to the Ole Miss fans, that the Ole Miss fans who've been rocking with the fellas going back to January when we're talking about this team in the transfer portal. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, hey, the boys have been prone to overreact a time or two about college football. We might be overreacting a little bit from a win against a South Carolina team that I don't think's all that good. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section, Dill. I'll give you the tee box. I think where you have to start is this Ole Miss defense and kind of give you a little summary here. 9 points per game allowed, number 3 in the country. 3.8 yards per play allowed, number 4 in the country. 1.9 yards per carry allowed. That's number 2 in the country. The numbers that this Ole Miss defense are putting up, sneaky, some of the better numbers that we see in the country here.
And I think one of the things we talked about coming into this year is you started to see Ole Miss play at least physical and tough along the line of scrimmage in the past couple of years, but now they have legitimate difference makers.
Yes.
And that's me. Like, you have Walter Nolan creating negative plays. You obviously have Princely and Jared Ivey both creating a lot of negative plays. JJ Peggis, his game is way up. I mean, he was just like one of those, like, okay, he's a good, solid SEC defensive tackle. He's starting to flash like, oh, this guy might be.
He was, for all of his, like, go back to 2023, like, he was a good football player, largely against the run. Dill, he has 13 quarterback hurries on the season. Like, this kid has taken massive strides in terms of what he can do as a pass rusher on the inside. I'm just, I guess, doubling down on the JJ take. I think this kid's been incredible to start 2024.
And I think that's leading to not just like being able to be a solid defense, but like, again, you're making more negative plays. Your sack numbers are way up. That's probably the most encouraging part for me. And you're getting them from a lot of different places. So when your defensive line, I think, plays at more of a dominant level than we've seen at Ole Miss probably in my lifetime, I think you put yourself in a good position to be a really good defense. But also, like, you look around it, I mean, their athleticism, their team speed, all those kind of things you look for are way up too. Like, the linebackers look faster, the defensive backs tackle, I think, a little better than we have. So again, you're just starting to see, this defensive line is playing at I mean, it might be a little bit warm of a take for my blood to say they're the best defensive line in the SEC, but they're right there. I mean, they're right there with anyone, especially
and that's always, at least for me, when I evaluate defenses, it's always where it starts. Like, you look at Michigan in 2023, why were they so elite? Started with the defensive line. You look at the past Georgia teams and why were those defenses elite? It started with the defensive line. I'm just going to run down some numbers real quick. Not going to waste too much of your time with some of the analytic nerd numbers, but I'm going to get into it a little bit. Jared Ivey, who's arguably been the best pass rusher on this team, and nobody's talking about him because he's not a new face or a five-star kid like Sunterian Perkins. 10 quarterback hurries, 19% pass rush win rate. Princely, who we said might be one of the best pure pass rushers in the country, 11 quarterback hurries, a 19% pass rush win rate, and wasn't allowed to feast on a South Carolina offensive line that stunk. Probably be a little bit higher if he had played. Suntarian Perkins leading the team, 16 quarterback hurries. They are using that. There's a clear picture in terms of how they want to use this kid. That was kind of the problem we had last year with Suntarian. Is that I don't think Ole Miss knew how they wanted to use him. Now it's very clear. Walter Nolan, 13 quarterback hurries from the inside. JJ Pegues, 13 quarterback hurries from the inside. They got 5 guys on that defensive line that are in double-digit quarterback hurries. They're leading the SEC in sacks, but how disruptive this defensive line has been next level. And then you look at the secondary, Dale, and I'm interested to hear your take on this. Some Ole Miss fans were after them in the secondary. I don't think they've played an elite passing attack, and I think we're going to get a better feel for just how good this Ole Miss defense is when we play, or not we, but when Ole Miss plays LSU Saturday night. But Dill, I don't think the secondary has been all that bad. They've had some unfortunate plays
I
and some
feel like that play against Kentucky, the one where Barian Brown caught, and again, an inexcusable play. You can't let that happen on 4th and 10. I don't know if that scheme.
I think it's scheme personally, but
a little bit of combo, because him running 1-to-1, man-to-man down the field like that is very surprising at that moment. But I feel like that is getting stuck in some Ole Miss fans' craw. And also, like, just everybody, like, everybody's kind of like identifying, like, oh, they lost the game because of that. And at the end of the day, Kentucky really couldn't move the ball through the air at all for most of that football game, and neither could South Carolina. So I look like you haven't really seen vulnerability yet. Now, you said it right. Like, at the end of the day, it's game time Saturday. We'll see how good they are, because LSU is going to be able to challenge them. That might be one of the better passing attacks in all of college football. But up till now, they've looked really, really good. And I think you look at guys like Jaden Kennedy playing really good. Trey Amos kind of playing the way you would have wanted him to come. So, like, they have some guys, I think, playing at a really high level. I think, again, I think a lot of it is that Barry and Brown.
100% agree with that. And what I'm most excited for is, like, we're kind of jumping on this train a little early. Like, I think this will be a very popular conversation people are having in 7 days if Ole Miss goes on the road to LSU and wins. But we're going to get a really feel for just how good this Ole Miss defense is against LSU from a couple of different metrics. One, Garrett Nussmeier is a very good quarterback. That LSU offensive line, purely in pass protection, might be the best unit in the country. And they obviously have difference makers at wide receiver. And so, yeah, we're high on this defensive line. How high are we on this defensive line? I'll let you know Saturday at midnight when that game kind of finalizes. But I look at the defense and say, this is a defense that can win an SEC championship. Now you flip it over to the offense and say it hasn't clicked. You look at the numbers and say they're still top 20 in a lot of different really important metrics on the offensive side of the football, but I think a lot of Ole Miss fans feel the exact same way. Like, you look at the game against Kentucky, you look at even against South Carolina, where you didn't sweat that one out for a moment, but I don't think the offense necessarily clicked the way you would like it to click. This offense, though, although it hasn't been at its best the last 2 weeks or last 2 games that we've seen, we know that they have the firepower and pieces to be one of the best units in the country. If I were to ask you the one thing you want to see Ole Miss clean up in terms of what is preventing them from kind of hitting that stride, what would it be for you?
I mean, they got to get the ball away from Trey.
Well,
That's what I think.
almost disagree with that. Like, I agree with Trey Harris maybe being a little bit over a line, and Trey Harris might have not even play against LSU. So we're really going to find out if Ole Miss can move.
And I want to make it clear that was not an anti-Trey Harris. That's just, I think they need to attack more of the field, because right now it feels like too many of the plays are going to him. And Jackson Dart, frankly, looks like he's playing a little fast in a sense. Like, okay, if my first thing's not there, it's immediately to Trey Harris, and that they got to get away from that. They got to get back to what they were last year, where they'd use everybody on the field. They'd attack every blade of grass. I thought that's when you look like that Penn State game to me is what kind of flashes. Like, they were Prieskorn was very involved. Everyone was very involved. Obviously, Trey Harris still leading the way, and he should lead the way, but they need to diversify this offense a little bit.
Yeah, when I look at the target distribution for this Ole Miss offense, and Trey Harris has 64 targets in 2024. The next most targeted pass catcher is Juice Wells with only 30 targets. Now, the conversation is, like, Ole Miss is having a ton of success going to Trey Harris. You look at the completion percentage when Trey Harris is targeted, 81%. We obviously know the production he's had. Now, the problem is they haven't necessarily unlocked Juice Wells, who we both think could be a top 10 wide, maybe even top 5 wide receiver. There was a point where I had a take that Juice Wells was the best wide receiver in the SEC heading into the 2023 season. I still think there's that Juice Wells in that football player. You got to figure out a way to unlock him, and you haven't really, right? A 56% completion percentage when Juice Wells has been targeted. I think that's a little bit on Juice Wells not making some plays. I think that's certainly on Jackson Dart not being as accurate as we need with the football. Dill, my bigger concern with Ole Miss outside of potentially the over reliance on Trey Harris, which I totally agree with. Like, you have all these weapons, like, go use them. You don't have to be a one-dimensional offense right now. Is that I think, if anything, they're a little over reliant on the deeper third explosive play. Look, Jackson Dart has taken some strides attacking the deeper third, pushing the football 20 plus yards down the field. But when it's not there, that's when this Ole Miss offense struggles. And at least when I look at it, okay, if the deep, like Kentucky did a great job just saying, hey, we're going to play 2-3. At some points, 3 high safeties. We're just going to take away the deeper third. And it seemed like Ole Miss was just confused on what to do. The last 2 games between Kentucky and South Carolina, Jackson Dart was 3 of 17 on 20 plus yards down the field. And because they weren't hitting those explosive plays, it seemed like that offense just was stagnant. I would like to see them not be so reliant on hitting the explosive play and, quite frankly, get back to the run game a little bit. I go back to that Kentucky film and say Kentucky light boxed them. Like, I thought there was the opportunity to run the football a little bit more. It didn't seem like Lane Kiffin wanted to do that. Look, you're so multidimensional. Use every weapon and use every concept in the book, including the run game for this Ole Miss offense.
And honestly, I think they've been pretty good up front blocking for the run. They've
For the
had
run, yes.
moments with the tackles not playing good enough football. That's for sure. Like, I'm not going to deny that. And
Yep.
And I think they were okay against South Carolina, but not great. And those guys are really, really good. So, like, we talk about best defensive lines. I mean, South Carolina is certainly in that conversation with Stewart and Kennard. But I think they did run the ball, frankly, way better than I thought they would against Kentucky. I mean, I look at that interior, the defensive line for Kentucky, those linebackers, that is a really, really tough unit. I thought, again, they were pretty physical up front. I think Parrish is running the ball incredibly well, so I want him to get more touches maybe. But I think you're right. I think that helps slow pass rushers down. I think that helps, again, get back to like an offense where you just had guys looking like they were open constantly. Right now, you're not really there.
So I'm gonna argue with you here. I think Henry Parrish is getting plenty touches. I think they need to run the football more. I don't think it just needs to be with Henry Parrish. Like, Henry Parrish and Matt Jones are the only 2 running backs getting utilized in this offense, and I'm with you. Like, I think Henry Parrish has ran the rock extremely well, but he's no Quinshon Judkins in terms of I don't think he can take a workload of 30 carries a football game. You go out and get Amos in the portal. You have Ulysses Bentley, who I think is a very good running back, not getting used. If you're Ole Miss and you want to play with the pace they want to play and how many reps they play on offense a game, use the depth that you have. Like, you went to the transfer portal to get depth so you can play as fast as you want to play. And the way I look at it, you just like, it's not seemingly like Ole Miss is using that depth. And I do want to close out on the one thing that I really do think Ole Miss can work on is in pass protection. And if there was one thing that I look at and say what might hold them back in terms of competing at the highest level was when you go up against some of these elite defensive lines, you want to push the ball down the field, right? 25% of Jackson Dart's throws are going 20 plus yards down the field. If you want to do that, you have to hold up in pass protection. I thought we saw them struggle both in Kentucky and South Carolina's football games. If this Ole Miss offensive line can just, because I think that's part of why Jackson Dart struggling attacking that deeper third. I think there's a lot of muddy pockets. He is dropping his eyes and trying to extend plays far too often. One, I think Jackson Dart's a little squirrely right now, but I think more importantly, the offensive line isn't giving him the cleanest pockets. If they can, clean that aspect up, I look at this Ole Miss team and say, I think they can compete at the highest level. Now, we'll see if they can clean some of those things up. And I think a lot of these questions are going to get answered Saturday night against LSU. But I look at this team and say, the way the defense is playing and the potential that the offense has, this is a team that can be very, very dangerous in the back half of this 2024 season. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.